I don't know anything about this newfangled technology.
What, the whole podcast thing?
Yes.
All right, so the most important thing for you to know is that Carmudgeon is every week. Every week you can get a Carmudgeon Show, and it's broadcast on YouTube in this video format, but really you don't actually need to look at us. You can download it on your favorite podcast provider, provided that provider is either Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or Google Podcasts. So go and subscribe to the podcast, get notified every single week that a new one's available, and you'll listen to us. Be curmudgeonly about
Or carmudgeonly if you prefer.
Carmudgeonly?
Yes.
Did you just make this shit up? I have to sing in Italian. Non dimenticar means don't forget you
are.
How do you know that? My darling.
Because my spirit age is 80.
Oh, you don't look a day over 94.
Ah, thank you. I
Acted.
try
Hello.
hard.
Welcome to the Carmudgeon Show. My name is Jason Cammisa, and this is Derek Tam-Scott.
You pronounced my name wrong.
Oh, sorry. I'm so confused. I thought you were going to be offended. This is Derek Tam-Scott. My name is Discount Adam Sandler. And today I am reading the book. I am reading the book on the Shelby Mustang by my friend Colin Comer. I just actually read this entire book cover to cover, which I can't remember the last time I read a book cover to cover that wasn't an owner's manual for one of my cars.
I don't think I've ever read one of the owner's manuals of my cars cover to cover.
I say that
I
knowing
skip
how
the section about how to put on their seatbelt.
Yeah. But the rest of it is really, like, you always find these weird things like, holy shit, if I turn the key the other way and hold it for 2 seconds.
Yeah, the window's all closed.
Or like the gas flap, like triple locks. So I do read my own manual.
Or the location of the power, the heated seats, heated steering wheel buttons.
Yeah, which are like hidden. They're on BMWs and they're on Porsches.
Yeah.
Really important. But I did read the book.
Why'd you read the book?
I read the book because we are doing an Icons episode on the GT500, the 2020 GT500. This is the second in the Icons series, the sort of high production value disasters to put together because there's so much fucking work, but so worth it videos that I've been waiting to do. So we got, I don't know whether this is going to air before or after the video comes out, but we got a lot of cars. There's going to be a lot of amazing shit. But the most amazing shit is actually the story of Carroll Shelby. And I don't mean the Ford v Ferrari movie. Did you see the movie?
I did, twice.
Okay. Are you offended by the factual inaccuracies?
As a curmudgeon, I'm obliged to say I'm offended, but overall, I really liked it. One of my favorite things about the movie was that it painted the way I see cars in a way that is consumable to the masses. So it allows like regular people to see cars the way I do, and I thought that was really powerful.
Doing 200 miles an hour on the Mulsanne
just
Straight?
Like it's this really colorful period, and because normally when I'm hanging out with people who are within a decade of my 94 years young, like they're like, oh, why are you into old cars? Like,
I see what you mean.
And so to me, it's like, watch this movie and experience the sensations of it, and maybe you'll understand why I like old cars.
Interesting.
So I liked that about it.
I had a very different takeaway from the movie. I thought it was a really interesting look at man versus company. Like when's the time to act out and bulldoze everyone in your path and lock the executive asshole in the office and run.
Spoiler alert.
Or when you got to toe the company line. And there is I am a little bit of a disruptor in large companies. I don't really work all that well because I have a vision of what I want to do, and I tend to push that through. And I thought it was a really great balance in the movie of telling the story of Carroll Shelby, who was similar in that regard. Yeah. Far more talented driver than I am, obviously. But similar in that regard, that he just he really wanted to push and get everyone the fuck out of his way because really he did know his product best. And I think they minimized his incredible successes as a driver. They needed to for the film.
Well, yeah, I mean, this film is like, wheels held this part of the story, and there's all this stuff that happened before that's really important. And
there's all this stuff that they left out and changed and took poetized. Like, I'm fine with all of it because it was an interesting story and it was factually accurate enough.
Yeah, and the gist of it comes across for the mainstream viewer as well.
And it wasn't too Hollywood. I mean, there's, of course, the scene where it's dark and it's raining and they're on the Mulsanne Straight and it's Ford versus Ferrari and they're next to each other and the cars are duking it out and one gets an inch further than the other one and they go back and forth and then all of a sudden, they're looking at each other and there's the evil Italian guy who literally did nothing in the entire movie but just give a dirty look to Carroll Shelby at all times in Italian. And then
Yeah, Ken Miles.
it was Ken, sorry. And then Ken would look back, and they would just sort of kept looking at each other.
Which you would not be doing at 200 miles an hour on the
in the
Mulsanne
rain on the
Straight.
Mulsanne Straight.
Yes.
And then I love how 45 seconds into this like epic battle of like horsepower, it finally occurs to Ken Miles, holy shit, maybe I should floor the gas pedal. And so his foot goes down and the tach goes from 6 to 7 because everything changes at 7,000 RPM. And then all of a sudden the speedo goes from 180 to 210 like this, pulverizing everyone because it defies the laws of physics and pulls 200 Gs and kills everyone in a 3-mile radius. And then he finally pulls ahead. That shit, I can really live with that. I want to strangle the director over that, but it's a good story.
Yes.
And what in my
And
research,
beautifully rendered. I think it was a love letter to some extent to a certain era and a certain of sports car racing when I think it was maybe a little, I don't actually know, maybe more mainstream? Maybe it wasn't more mainstream than it is
I think
now.
it was.
It was on TV,
I think people cared about it more.
especially because there were Americans for the first time at Le Mans, so that
That's
was why it was on TV in the US.
Don't get me started on current racing because I think it's all a little
I
bit
don't
too.
know anything about it.
Why would you? Here's what you need to know about it. Everyone doesn't, no one passes anyone. It's incredibly clinical. It's about strategy far more than it is about racing. I want to see a bunch of people get into a bunch of saloon cars, bash the shit out of them, jump over each other, crash into each other, and whoever's smoking, steaming heap of shit makes it across the finish line first wins.
You're talking about 24 Hours of Lemons.
Or demolition derbies or whatever else. Anyway, but what I found really most interesting about the Shelby story is all the little details that the movie didn't get to. Like, for example, the whole Shelby Mustang thing, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. The GT350, which was the first Shelby branded street
We
car.
should take a step back and go just a little earlier to where Shelby started, which
Sure.
was that he was like really a keen racing driver, and he won Le Mans. And as they point out in the movie, one of the only American drivers ever to win Le Mans,
Right.
which he did in 1959, driving for Aston Martin. And then he had to stop racing because of the heart problem, which they also talk about in the movie.
Right, but I love how he has said in interviews that he was popping nitroglycerin pills the entire time he was racing. I mean, you talked about a man's man, like just some tough motherfucker who is having an ongoing angina attack the entire time, and still won.
Yep.
So nuts.
That's why I think that era particularly is glorified for motor racing. So anyway, he has to stop racing and he starts selling Goodyear tires, which is why like Cobras and Shelby products always have Goodyear tires on them, because he was a Goodyear tire distributor. So if he was going to be making his own cars, damned if he wasn't going to put tires that he was also selling on his
He
own.
was a businessman first and foremost.
So he was selling tires, and he was kind of bummed that he was just stuck selling tires. And so he was like, his dream had always been to make his own car. If he couldn't be racing, he wanted to make his own car. And that's where the Cobra came from, which was in production as, the predecessor really was in production as an AC,
Right.
as the AC Ace and AC Bristol, and those were powered by 3 different engines. There was an AC engine, a Bristol engine, which was actually a pre-war BMW design that they got as spoils from winning World War II, because Bristol made airplanes, and then a Ford Zephyr engine, and then they ran out of engine supply, and they still had this car, which was beautiful and light and pretty sophisticated chassis, or was when it came out 10 years earlier. And Carroll Shelby wants to make his own car, and so he approaches them and says, what if I take your car and I put some other motor in it? So he's going around to Detroit trying to figure out some motor to put in it, and eventually he comes up with, from Ford, a 260 cubic inch pickup truck engine, a light duty
V8.
pickup truck engine, V8. And that conjoining, which was Carroll Shelby's work, became the early Cobra, and that car became pretty legendary. And that was with that in mind that I think Ford approached him to build what became the GT350, because the Mustang had come out, and they were like, this car has a bit of an image problem.
It's amazing. The Mustang came out in 64 and a half, right? So halfway through the year in 64. And the sales numbers are ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they sold about 600,000 a year for the first 3 years.
There was a Detroit baker who said that our hotcakes are selling like Mustangs during that period.
Yeah, they sold, so I mean, famously it's quoted, they sold 1 million of them in 18 months. And to put that in perspective today, if you look at the amount of Honda Accords that are sold in the United States, it's currently 300,000 a year. And that's a family, that's a practical $23,000 base, family sedan. Imagine these days, selling twice that many compact sports cars.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
was a genuinely small car by contemporary
Right.
standards, and it only had
Right,
two
and Mustang
doors.
is doing really, really well. It's outselling almost its competitor. Ford likes to point out that it's outselling most of its competitors 2-1. Camaro's almost 2-1. 4 Series is 2-1.
Camaro didn't exist. Oh,
No, now.
Yes,
And so
sorry.
now, but even now, outselling all of its competition 2-1, they're selling 70,000 a year, and they sold 600,000 a year. I mean, insane. But we don't think about this now so much. But that car was, to use the period language, a secretary's car, right?
The period ads are amazing.
We'll play some period ads here because this is so insulting. It's amazing.
Should a single girl buy a Mustang, a 66 Mustang? Oh, well, let's see.
Mustang's everything you could ask for on a secretary's salary.
Emily Patterson's worked for me 15 years. Quiet, efficient, sensible. I count on her. But lately she's changed. There's something about her I've never seen before. No mystery about Emily. She's a Mustanger now. This is the car that looks like thousands of dollars worth of sports car, yet it's priced to fit a secretary's salary.
Hey, lady, you look like a sexy broad with a secretary's. I mean, unbelievable. I can't believe they did those ads. But here's the thing. Not the secretary's image thing didn't come from the ads. It was the other way around. It came because the car was actually an economy car underneath.
Yeah, it was based on the Falcon
Right.
underneath.
And Falcon's a great name, Ford Falcon. But that was like an economy shitbox, compact. So like imagine if, like, you know, we're all berserk that the Supra is actually a Z4 underneath. Imagine if that was like a Yaris or a Corolla underneath. Like that would really, people would lose their minds. And that was the problem with the original 65 Mustang, was it was an economy car underneath. And so no one took it, like it sold like hotcakes.
Yeah, I mean,
no
and
one
there
took
were
it
like a lot
seriously.
of them were inline sixes, like 3-speed manual. I don't know if you could get a column shift, but it was a floor shift 3.
They were all proud of it. That
Yeah.
it was available.
Floor
for speed.
shift. Yeah.
But they realized very quickly, to Lee Iacocca's credit, who was, you know, kind of in charge of the Mustang project, he realized really quickly, the wrong people are buying these cars. It may be 600,000 of them, but enthusiasts are like, pfft.
Yeah.
So he brought in Carroll Shelby, who was also at the same time in the process of turning the GT40 into a thing. And this is one thing that the movie didn't talk about.
Yeah, it sort of got the timeline a little
Right,
bit off.
so if I get it right, 63, the GT40 went into production, and that was a
Or development.
development, right, and that was a purpose-built race car, and that they did together with Lola. But the car was
It was built in
terrible.
England.
It was built in England.
And
It was
that's
an
why
English
in the
car.
movie the car just appears at the airport having already been built, and he wasn't really involved in the initial like building or speccing of the car or development.
And
of
they
it.
sort of skipped over the fact that it had already had a year of racing, during which it did terribly.
Yeah, everything kept breaking.
Yeah. So they put Carroll Shelby in charge of the project to take this shitbox GT40, beautiful but not reliable and not competitive, and turn it into a race car. At about the exact same time, we're talking the same year, that they gave him this Secretary's Mustang and said, "You got to make a race." Iacocca said, "You got to make a race car out of this." And Shelby's comment was, "Lee, I can't make a racehorse out of a mule," like so typically Shelby. But he did. He did.
The 65 GT350 was the result, and it is, I think, rightfully so, revered by collectors, even against the 66, which looks the same.
Right.
But there were a lot of special features in the 65 only, and that's why there's.
This is something I didn't know. So I did actually just read this book cover to cover, and I'd never really done much research on these cars. So to make the race car, they had some severe limitations. First of all, the SCCA's rules were that Shelby could either fuck with the engine or fuck with the chassis of the car. Couldn't do both. So he told Ford to send him a bunch of knockdown Mustangs. So like Mustangs.
Yeah, so
with the
he arranged.
K code.
Yeah, he arranged for the San Jose, California plant for 2 weeks straight to make nothing but white fastback K code Mustangs,
Right,
which
so-
were like not even finished out, and then taken down to Southern California.
So this was like basically a Mustang GT. So the biggest motor.
This is the
most
fastback,
power,
yeah,
right?
with the 271 horse.
289.
289 cubic
Right.
inch.
Yeah, 289 cubic inch V8. That so he took these cars, and so he didn't touch the motor at all. He wasn't allowed to make the race car, but he had some pretty nasty suspension geometry to deal with. So they did major revisions to this car's chassis. This wasn't like like shocks and springs. This was moving mounting points for suspension, doing all these bizarre shit to control. It was a solid rear axle, so like, control all of that. Side exit exhausts.
Detroit locker.
Detroit locker rear end, which was
You're talking about specifically the race cars, not the production street 350s.
Well, the production street 350s
have a lot of the same
right,
suspension
the same
changes.
Right.
Yeah.
So the GT350 racing cars went on to be successful, but he did this whole project in a matter of a couple of months. And it was a favor to him because basically the Group B cars were all supposed to be 2-seat, and the Mustang was a 4-seater. So
that's why all the 65 street cars are 2-seaters, and they don't have anything in the back. And
right, but he called Iacocca calls the SCCA president or whatever, and was like, hey, I would like to enter this car in Group B, and the guy's like, 4-seater, go fuck yourself. Shelby calls and is like, hey, I pulled the back seats out of it, so it's a 2-seater. We're good, yeah, because they were buddies. So he gets the car actually homologated for Group B, or whatever it's called, B.
B production.
B production. Puts the car into racing by the end of the year. He had like 6 months to not only conceive, engineer, but build 100 street cars for homologation, homologation special, so that he was legit. And those are the first run of the 1965 GT350 Shelby street cars.
Yeah.
So basically untouched 289, but insane modifications. Like it had a 10-inch rear drum in the back. So brakes, chassis, suspension, all of that was completely modified. He did a different front end, hood scoops, like all that shit.
Tachometer and the dash pod and the real wood steering wheel, all the things that disappeared for 66.
Okay, so everything I've read was the 65 car was like, oh my God, genuine race car for the street.
Yes, which as it turns out with consumers, we're like, oh, this thing's kind of loud inside,
right? And
the brakes don't work unless they're hot.
Yeah, so they ran into problems where where customers were complaining, and even the car, like Car and Driver, I think wrote like, wow, for X amount of dollars you can go buy last year's clapped out race car, brand new. Like they were making fun of it, that it was so loud and so difficult to drive and so extreme.
Just pure,
that I think, so that feedback loop got to Shelby real quick. And he started for 66 realizing like he's got to decontent these cars in terms of race cars. Because what he realized was people say they want a race car for the street, but actually they want something like that seems like a race car.
Looks like a race car.
Yeah, it looks
so
like
they
a race
look
car.
Visually almost identical to 65 and 66 from the outside. If you know what to look for, well, the rear quarter window is vents in 65 and it's a window in 66. That's the best way to tell from the outside.
But they're completely different. So
Yeah.
the 66 went back to the standard Mustang suspension, including ride height and everything else, and suspension mounting points and pickups and all that shit. And it went to a conventional exhaust at the rear with the same headers. I mean, it just got really, really toned down.
Much more streetable car.
Right.
But that's why now there's probably a $100,000 delta between a 65 and a 66 in terms of value.
65s are worth
$100,000 more than a 66.
Funny that what was considered too extreme to be daily driving, this happens a lot, something that's too extreme and too special becomes an asset later on when the car is old and special.
The same thing is true of a Porsche Speedster. The Porsche Speedster was just a car they took a whole bunch of stuff out of so they could get the price under $3,000 in 1955. And those cars are now worth much more than the other cars because they're the sort of purist and they're associated with all these motorsports people like Steve McQueen. And anyway.
Yeah, but that happened. So 66 got really decontented.
Yes.
Gradually, from what I can understand. Like it looks like there were a bunch of
rolling
carryover
changes. Yeah.
And then the 67 Mustang was a different car.
Yeah, not completely. It was restyled, but it was a much more streetable car, and it was much more of a bold new graphic, not quite bold new graphics. Like there was different mechanical content, but those cars often have power steering and like to drive. You drove.
Well, we're not there yet because I've only driven. The only one I ever drove was the GT500.
500.
So what happened was 67 was a new Mustang that was bigger, and the engine compartment was physically larger, and Shelby realized he could fit a big block. So he put the 428 engine in, which was the police Interceptor engine. This is basically the police motor, untouched. Again, he didn't touch anything. And then basically suspension to compensate for the extra weight, because it was like 500 pounds more than a GT350.
Yeah, so 289 versus 428 cubic inch.
And by the way, what I love about this is the 427 that was in the Cobra was actually a 425 point something, and the 428 was a 427. So in terms of cubic inches. So none of these actually, the 428, it was not a 428 cubic inch engine. This drives me crazy. But anyway, so he put this 428 monster in this car, and then let it be optioned with an automatic if you wanted it to, and air conditioning and radio.
Power steering.
And all that stuff. Because he realized that this is what people thought of. When you think about what seems a race car like, it's power. That's the first thing.
And stripes.
Right. Well, and stripes. But it didn't have stripes, did it? From the factory?
So they were optional.
Right.
They were optional, and I think maybe dealer fitted, and some cars got them and some didn't. I think the one on the bottom might have been standard, and the ones on top were like
the one
optional.
on the sides were standard, where it actually said GT500.
Yes.
But that's the sort of legend that's reborn again for 2020. So it was always my understanding that the original GT500 was a big...
Can we talk about the name, by the way, for a minute?
Oh, God. This is the other coolest thing in the world. So if I had to ask you, dear listener/viewer, what the 350 and the GT350 stood for, this was mind-blowing.
So contemporaneously, Lamborghini is producing the 350 GT, which sensibly in a European fashion, 350 is because it's 3.5 liters.
Right, and Ferrari would have had, let's say a 250, and their naming scheme was, that was a little earlier, but let's say a 250 meant each cylinder had 250
cc's. Correct.
That was times 12, and what of that. Everyone had a naming scheme that was sort of based on something measurable. But the GT350 did not
What is the displacement of the GT350?
289.
It's 289, which is 4.6 liters.
I don't know, you can do that in your math. It's 289,
I think
that's all
so.
I know. So it did not, in fact, have a 350 cubic inch or anything else engine. It did not have 350 horsepower or anything close to it. It was high twos, low threes. And then it did not have 350 pound-feet of torque. I mean, it was just came out of nowhere. And reading the book, I learned that Shelby had to come up with a name for it. Ford wanted to call it the Cobra Mustang because that engine was called the Cobra Jet. And like they just came up with all these like different things. Shelby didn't like it and was like, said to Phil Remington, one of the most amazing craftsmen in the world, hey, how far do you think that we are from the other building, basically? So they had a race shop and a streetcar shop. And he was like, I don't know, 350 feet? And so Shelby named the car GT350 just like that on a whim. And he then later said that he liked that because it wasn't stuck to anything. His competitors wouldn't know what he was up to. He could make changes, like if it was GT289 and the next year Ford punched it to 292, he's got to change all his marketing shit, whatever. It's like GT350, it's perfect. And then GT500, one assumes he's just like, well,
it's more than 350.
More than 350. It's a lot more than 350. Yeah, we'll go. I think that's so rad. I think he's so cool. And he was such a marketing genius. And his attitude was, I wish I had the quote exactly in front of me, is if the car's great, a bad name isn't going to hurt it. And if the car's no good, a good name ain't gonna fix it. And he was right. I wish marketing guys today understood this. Like, just make a good fucking product. It doesn't matter what you call it. Don't be calling it a Supra if it's a BMW. Don't be calling it a Mustang Mach-E if it's a fucking electric, SUV. But he got it. Make the car good. Forget about the name. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, but the GT500, the first one, wasn't really good.
Really? Because I ran a lot of road tests in it.
Well, they're judging it by the standards of contemporary American road cars, which is like compared to like a big American seagoing vessel, like it's agile and it certainly was fast, but it was not a sports car. Like
no,
it didn't handle well. Like it would not be something you would want to take to the track.
No, the only 500 thing about it is that it was 500 pounds heavier than the GT350, which is fucking mind-boggling because the GT350 at that point was like 300 pounds heavier than the original 65. So this car gained 800 pounds in 3 years.
What was your impression driving it?
So the only one that I've ever driven, I had 2 passengers in it, and
it was
an automatic.
Oh.
So the manual did 0 to 60 in between 6.2 and 6.5, according to what I can
believe
see.
that.
That was pretty quick for back in the
I drove
day.
a KR. I drove a KR convertible.
KR was a lot more power.
Yeah,
but the convertible would have been heavier.
Zippy. And it has that amazing old American experience where you rev it and the car is in danger of rolling over because of all of the torque from just revving it while you're stationary.
I thought it was good. It was that typical American straight line cruiser
yes.
where you know, it hiked up its skirt and fucking went and made
Yeah.
all the right noises.
Yeah,
and
but like a
looks
lot of play in the
badass.
steering.
Oh,
And
yeah.
like it's not a car you would want to hustle in any circumstance.
way.
Even the 67 350 that I drove was the same way.
Really?
Like, there was the really over-assisted steering and like
Yeah.
a lot of play, and so that's not the kind of stuff where you can consistently put the car on the road in a place where you're hustling it.
And this is the thing to me that, like, in my mind, all Shelby cars were like this. They were big, dumb fun. You know, like they were the sort of Dodge demons of the day.
65 350s are not.
Right. So that I didn't know. The next time that we used the Shelby name really on a Ford product was 2012 when the GT500 came
What
out.
about, didn't they have like some 4-cylinder turbocharged stuff in
Dodge
the 80s?
stuff. That's when
those all Dodge?
Iacocca took Shelby with him when he went over to Chrysler. So you have the Dodge Omni GLH and the GLH S, which GLH stood for Goes Like Hell, which is a Shelby thing, and the S was the Shelby or Super or whatever else was on top of that.
So those 4-cylinder turbo Mustangs didn't have the word
Those
Shelby
are
on
SVO.
them? Okay.
Weren't those SVO? I don't think those were Shelby. I could be completely wrong. I don't think so.
I could too. That's not my area of expertise.
But the next Mustang Shelby GT3 numbers was the 2012 car.
07?
12.
I thought there was a
There was-
GT500 in 07.
Oh God, I hope not. I don't
There
remember.
was, I
Was
think.
there?
Yeah.
Are you
pre LCI?
Are you LC? That's a BMW term. You can't use that in these
What?
parts.
I don't know what to call it. Pre-facelift.
Pre-facelift.
Pre-facelift, like 07, there was
sure that's not the
definitely
Cobra
a
you're
GT500.
thinking about?
We can
Whatever.
break
We
the
don't
no
need to.
phone rule.
No, but there was the independent suspension Cobra thing, but there was I'm thinking of the 2012 GT500, which was the 662 horsepower, big dumb supercharged.
yeah, but
car.
there was a version of that car before the facelift, which existed in like 07. In any case,
I never drove.
decades elapsed.
Decades elapsed, and that GT500 is what it was, which was a big dumb straight line
With the live
thing.
rear end.
with a live axle at the back. It turned. It's amazing how docile that car was on a racetrack, but it could not deal with that power. It was insane. And the saddest part was that Ford marketed that whole thing together with Shelby as the first 200 mile an hour factory Mustang, and Car and Driver I think got it to 192 and like showed they wound up dynoing the car. I mean, they did everything they could to make sure that this was a really 200 mile an hour car, and it wasn't. And so now there's a new GT500 out for 2020. That's what we're doing the video on. It's a slightly different formula because it's a dual clutch automatic, and it's now obviously an independent rear end. And Ford's limiting it to 180. And the engineers were like, I'm like, oh, so you got burned enough the last time? And they're like, no. There's a bunch of compromises we would have had to bake into the suspension geometry and some tires and other parts of the car to allow it to safely do 200. That would have adversely affected handling. And this is no longer a straight line, top speed, crazy
I think that's
muscle car.
consistent with our expectations based on the current GT350.
Well, and that was my thought is, well, if you have the GT350 is genuinely one of the best modern sports cars, period. Do we need room for a GT500 in drag, in GT350 drag? And I drove the fucking thing. And yes, it is 100% track car. It is 100%.
The 500?
The 500. It's 100% as good as the 350 on track, possibly even better.
With
but
like
either way, definitely fast.
250 more horsepower or something?
760 versus 526. It's stupid fast, but it's also
How's the traction?
unbelievable. So there are two packages you can get. There's the street, the sort of street pack, and then the carbon fiber track pack, which has stickier tires and whatever. The street car roasted its tires in second and third gear, but ultimately was still controllable. The track car is magic, genuine magic.
So we have a 760 horsepower car available to buy that has traction to put it down.
And for $80,000. But the thing to me is that I didn't get it at first. The GT350 is manual only. It has a flat plane crank, revs to 8,200 RPM. Naturally aspirated. Just all of the right things that I want in a sports car and that I think something with a GT350 badge should be. Just compromised enough to be special on the street, but unlike the 64 cars, you can drive it every day. I would, you would, maybe somebody else would bitch that it's so loud and it makes all this, terrible noises and it rides like shit. And
I would
whatever.
do it. Having driven one. I think it's fine.
I think it's perfectly.
I have low standards.
We're pretty extreme in the
Yes.
stuff that we'll put up with. So I thought, wow, what are they doing with this GT500? Why? They already have the GT350. Is this an excuse to put a stupid automatic in it to get in additional sales? But man, no, that thing is just unbelievable. And it weighs, here we go, once again, 500 pounds more than the GT350. And it manages.
So what's the value proposition? The value proposition of the 350 is clear. What's the value proposition of the 500?
It's a lot faster than the GT350. So speed is
in all circumstances?
I mean, I'm talking straight line speed. So, it's a lot more power. I think around a racetrack, it would be measurably a lot faster.
Because of the power?
Because of the power and the grip. It's got stupid amounts of grip. And it's so easy to drive. And it's a dual clutch. So, a good
Lap
fast shifting
times.
dual
It's a
clutch.
GT3 RS versus a GT3.
Correct. GT3 Touring is the car that I would buy because I want the manual and the experience of it. A GT3 RS is the car that I would buy to minimize a lap time. It's a car that I buy to race, put it that way. And this is the same thing. The 500 is nowhere near as special on the road as the GT350 is because the GT350's engine and shifter are absolutely amazing, and the 500 is just kind of civilized. It's in non-track mode, the automatic slur shifts. So you get that, kind of just goes away. But around a track, oh my God. And so I thought it was really an unspoken part of the Shelby story is that these Shelby Mustangs are really something special.
Nowadays.
Nowadays, and were. I mean, if you think
the
about
early ones, I agree.
That
The
early
later,
one.
the like 67, 8 to me, like, it's not a gratifying driver's car. The 65 is.
65 is. That much of a difference, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, you look through the list.
I guess maybe all of the later cars I've driven have had power steering, and that takes the steering from being like direct and like physical and very like clear about what's happening with the front end, to just like it's a car you drive with one finger, like any American boat. It could be like a 61 Continental.
It's amazing how steering can ruin a whole car, right? I mean, in this case, it was everything.
And body control.
Right. It was, they moved the suspension mounting points. They dropped everything they had, and the Detroit locker was no joke. I mean, that was, they made a lot of noise. They were some pretty severe stuff. The later cars had open diffs. They had, regular Mustang suspension. But I think he figured out, I think it's really cool to look at like his history of taking cars that are shit and don't work at their intended purpose and making them magic. And then very quickly adapting to what the market wanted and say, well, a homologation car is really great, but actually there are a lot more people who'd rather have the appearance of a race car than an actual race car.
Imagine if he'd ever done a clean sheet design. Did he ever?
He did. There was one, I think it was called the Series 1 that had, I want to say, the automobile-based supercharged Northstar, maybe?
Yeah, this is like in
Aurora.
the late 90s. Is that what the motor is? I try not to think about that car ever.
Aurora,
But I mean, considering what he did with the AC Ace and then the Mustang, and I just imagine if he had built something from the ground up during that period, how epically good it would have been.
Ford took us on the GT500 launch. The first night they had a presentation at Shelby American's shop, and we got a shop tour, and they had a Super Snake, a whole bunch of modified cars. This is in Vegas.
Yeah.
And they had a Super Snake, which is an 800 horsepower manual transmission, big flared fenders, gorgeous
Cobra?
Mustang. I need a coffee or something. Cafe. We have all these Italians here, and there's no coffees with us. Oh no, one Italian just gets up. Oh my God, this is service. This is really cool. I'm gonna get a coffee. Can you put one of those creamy sugar things in it, please? Oh my God, he's gonna poison it. But yeah, no, I just thought like I will try to insert a photo of it because I'm just kind of walking around Shelby American's factory like, okay, there's a bunch of trucks with, like crazy superchargers on it, whatever. And there was this Mustang. And I thought, fuck, like this should be on everyone's radar. And I don't think it is. Like basically even more horsepower. It's a current Mustang. Current Mustang. But these big fender flares in the back and they're grafted into the fenders so beautifully. And the car just looked fat and thick and heavy and beautiful. And I thought, okay, the current Mustang, the Bullet is spectacularly beautiful, and I don't use that term lightly. I think it's like stunning in its proportions. And this car just made it fatter and better, and I thought I could really, really get into the idea of an 800 horsepower rear-wheel drive stupid machine. And then I drove the current GT500 and couldn't fucking believe. It's so good. It's so good. They literally, the only car with more than 600 horsepower in it and two-wheel drive that I'm comfortable really pushing. I slid it around, I did all kinds of terrible things. This is on the launch on the racetrack. And I left stability on for most of it and then turned it off and realized the car's just benign. It's just really good. And that is a new thing for a GT500.
Yeah, I mean, because of the image, especially when you think about Cobras in the old days, it was like the kind of thing, I mean, 2,200 pounds with a nominally 425 horsepower engine, which was actually, it's a derated number. They had more horsepower in the 1960s with no traction control and like no ABS, no anything. I mean, those things are terrifying cars to drive. Cobras, like
I like terrifying
early Cobras.
For a second. Oh, hold on, we have a coffee delivery here. Thank you. Ciao, Luca, grazie.
For you, Mr. Cammisa.
Is there?
Yeah,
Oh my God, it's hold on. Yeah, no, it's a little bitter. You're gonna see a brick flying right through my face. So you've driven, or have you driven anything with a 427 in it? And I ask because the 427 and the 428 are very different. Right? The 427 was basically a race engine that was very expensive to build. And the KR, the GT500
Do you know where that
KR,
motor came from, right?
the 427?
Yes.
No.
Originally, before it was in the Cobra and all this other stuff, and in these Mustang products, it was in the Galaxy, which was the full-size NASCAR thing that they.
So that was the NASCAR motor?
It was a NASCAR motor.
That's
yes.
so cool.
Which they put and
In
sold
the
in the street,
boat.
and you could actually get it in a station wagon. It was an available option in the full-size Galaxy with the wood paneling down the side as a station wagon with a 4 on the floor.
That's so right.
But yeah, that motor was available as R code or Q code in the Galaxy with depending on the carb setup. But yes, that motor in the Cobra was absolutely insane.
Bonkers, yeah, it would have to be.
It's totally wild.
That's so cool. That's so cool. But I didn't realize that 427 and 428 were that
Yeah, the
different. They really-
428 is just like a mass-produced.
And then that
LTD
GT500 KR,
Yes.
the King of the Road that you drove, is actually a 428 but with 427 heads on it, right? And
And it has a different intake, and I mean, again, it had a plastic rimmed steering wheel, and it had power steering. It was a 68, and it just felt like a big sort of aquatic or nautical driving experience because of the over-assisted, really light steering with a lot of play in it.
Was it fast like AF, or was it?
It was, by vintage car standards, yeah, and especially considering how good the brakes and steering were, it felt very fast.
Meaning the brakes and steering were
Or
terrible, so
poor,
therefore.
it felt really fast.
I love that.
It was overpowered.
I love that. Speaking of brakes, that Shelby did all these brake upgrades to the GT350. So for 65, the car came out, and then 66, I think it was, were all the Shelby, the Hertz cars.
Yes.
Right. So he did a deal with Hertz where they had 999. I think.
I don't know.
I think it
You
was
read the book.
999 cars. Yeah. Go and buy this book on Amazon and support Colin Comer. There's a whole section in here. It's like so rad. You get to see like all of the Hertz cars. But I think there are only 1,000 of these to rent in the entire world. Hertz has them all. See.
Yeah, so they're all black or almost all black.
Almost all black because there was a bunch of
some
orders
white
that got screwed
ones.
up.
Oh, were the blue ones? There were blue ones and white ones?
There were a bunch of colors, and there were supposed to be all automatics, but there were some manuals. But either way, you could go to Hertz, and it was like, you had to be 19 years old. It was $19 a day. There was this whole marketing scheme bullshit. But they had to put a sticker on the car because people kept wrecking them because the brakes didn't work when they were cold because they were race brakes.
You know why else people kept wrecking them?
Because they were fast as fuck.
Because people kept racing them.
Yeah.
They would put roll bars in them. They
Cages.
bolt in a roll cage and go racing and then return it on Monday morning.
Yeah, so you see all
This one already has holes drilled in it for the last time someone put a roll cage in it.
Apparently, like Hertz would routinely find these cars that had weld marks and evidence that someone had welded in a roll cage. I mean, you think I'm a rental car abuser? They welded in a roll cage, raced it for the weekend, returned it like, here you go. Can you
At least
imagine?
it was intact, nominally intact when they returned it.
Some of them were. I wonder how many survived.
Yeah, they're around still. They're not terribly valuable, I think, because they're all automatics and they're all 66s. But they're definitely kicking around.
That's really
still.
cool. Well, I recommend for anyone who's interested in a cool piece of history to go watch that movie, first of all.
Agreed.
I think everyone should watch this Icons episode because we have some pretty epic shit planned. I'm not going to say any more than that. I'm going to go back to reading my book. Also, next episode, clearly we're going to have to do Ferrari versus Lamborghini.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Well,
I would watch that,
yeah,
or
but
even
here-
participate in it.
Very simple. Ferrari has raced their cars. Lamborghinis all suck because they were never raced, and racing improves the breed, as Shelby proved.
Well, look at that. We just did 2 episodes in one. There's nothing else to
Two for
say
the
on
price
that
of one.
topic.